They thought he was easy prey, until he showed them what a real fighter looks like. 17-year-old Marcus Delano adjusted his worn backpack straps as he walked through the imposing glass doors of Westfield High School for the third time that week. His slight frame and quiet demeanor had already marked him as different in a place where conformity ruled supreme. Standing barely 5'7" with messy brown hair that refused to cooperate and clothes that never quite fit right, Marcus had perfected the art of invisibility. What his new classmates didn't know was that beneath his unassuming exterior lay 15 years of rigorous training in Krav Maga and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, skills he'd promised his late father he would only use when absolutely necessary. The hallways of Westfield High buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Students clustered around lockers, their conversations creating a symphony of teenage drama and weekend recaps. Marcus kept his head down, navigating toward his first period chemistry class when a shoulder deliberately slammed into his, sending his books cascading across the polished linoleum floor. "Watch where you're going, freak," sneered Tyler Hoffman, the self-appointed king of junior class cruelty. At 6'2", with perfectly styled blonde hair and a Letterman jacket that seemed permanently attached to his shoulders, Tyler commanded attention wherever he went. His cronies, Jake Morrison and Brett Collins, flanked him like loyal hounds, their smirks broadcasting their readiness for entertainment at Marcus's expense. Marcus silently gathered his scattered belongings, ignoring the snickers from passing students. Not worth it, he reminded himself, remembering his father's words about choosing battles wisely. He'd learned long ago that drawing attention only made things worse, and fighting back would raise questions he wasn't prepared to answer. "Did you see that?" Jake whispered loudly enough for half the hallway to hear. "New boy didn't even say anything. What a pushover." The morning incident set the tone for what would become a relentless campaign of harassment. In the cafeteria during lunch, Marcus sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating his homemade sandwich while observing the social hierarchy that governed teenage existence. Tyler's table occupied prime real estate in the center of the room, surrounded by cheerleaders, athletes, and anyone desperate enough to bask in reflected popularity. "Hey, zombie boy," Brett called out, his voice carrying across the crowded space. "You deaf or just stupid?" Marcus continued eating, his expression neutral despite the heat rising in his chest. Years of training had taught him to control his breathing, to remain calm under pressure. He watched Tyler stand up, his movement causing conversations to quiet as students sensed approaching drama. "I'm talking to you, weirdo," Tyler announced, approaching Marcus's table with theatrical swagger. "My friend asked you a question." "I heard him," Marcus replied quietly, his voice steady despite the attention now focused on their interaction. Tyler's face darkened at the perceived disrespect. Without warning, he grabbed Marcus's lunch tray and dumped its contents onto the floor, creating a mess of sandwich remnants and spilled milk that drew gasps from nearby tables. "Oops," Tyler said with mock innocence. "Guess you'll be hungry today." Marcus stared at the ruined meal, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. The cafeteria had gone silent, dozens of eyes watching to see how he would respond. Teachers sat at their supervision table, seemingly oblivious to the confrontation unfolding just 20 feet away. He stood slowly, gathering his empty tray and walking toward the disposal area without a word. Behind him, Tyler's laughter echoed through the space, soon joined by his followers and several other students emboldened by the lack of consequence. The pattern continued for weeks. In gym class, Marcus found his clothes soaked with water from the showers. His locker was repeatedly vandalized with crude messages and sticky substances. During group projects, partners would mysteriously request transfers, leaving him to work alone while enduring whispered comments about his supposed weirdness. Through it all, Marcus maintained his composure. He attended his classes, completed his assignments, and spoke only when spoken to directly. His teachers saw a quiet, studious young man who caused no trouble. His classmates saw a victim too weak to defend himself. What none of them noticed were the subtle changes beginning to manifest, the way Marcus's posture gradually straightened, how his eyes began tracking movement with increased awareness, the almost imperceptible shift from passive acceptance to active observation. Sarah Chen, a girl from his English class, noticed first. She'd watched the ongoing harassment with growing discomfort, her own experiences with bullying making her sensitive to the dynamics at play. "You don't have to take their crap, you know," she said one afternoon as they walked toward the parking lot. Marcus glanced at her, surprised by the unexpected interaction. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," Sarah replied with gentle firmness. "But there's something different about you lately, like you're waiting for something." She was more perceptive than he'd given her credit for. Marcus had indeed been waiting, hoping the situation would resolve itself naturally, but Tyler and his crew were escalating, their harassment becoming bolder and more public with each passing day. The weeks dragged on with increasing intensity. Tyler's group had begun targeting Marcus in more creative ways, stealing his homework assignments and turning them in late, convincing substitute teachers that he was disruptive, even going so far as to spread rumors about his family background. The psychological warfare was relentless and methodical. Marcus's mother had noticed the changes at home. He'd grown quieter, more withdrawn, spending long hours in the basement practicing forms and techniques his father had taught him. She'd asked about school, but Marcus deflected her concerns with vague responses about adjusting to a new environment. He's protecting everyone by staying quiet, Marcus told himself during those late-night training sessions. Dad always said that real strength means knowing when not to fight, but his father had also taught him about lines that shouldn't be crossed, about moments when restraint became complicity, about the difference between choosing peace and accepting defeat. The breaking point came on a cold Thursday morning in late October. Marcus arrived at school to find his locker had been broken into overnight. His textbooks were scattered across the floor, pages torn and covers defaced with permanent marker. Personal items his mother had packed were destroyed, including a photograph of his father in military uniform. That photograph was irreplaceable. For the first time since starting at Westfield High, Marcus felt something crack inside his carefully maintained composure. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the damaged picture, trying to smooth out the creases where someone had deliberately folded it. "Looking for this?" Tyler's voice came from behind him, mockingly sweet. Marcus turned to see Tyler holding a piece of torn photograph, the corner that contained his father's face. Jake and Brett flanked him as usual, their expressions gleeful with anticipated entertainment. "Give it back," Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. "What's that? I can't hear you, mumble boy," Tyler taunted, holding the photograph fragment higher. "This your daddy? Bet he's real proud of raising such a wimp." The words hit like physical blows, but Marcus forced himself to remain still. Violence wasn't the answer. It never was. His father had taught him that strength meant protecting others, not proving points through aggression. "Please," Marcus said quietly, "just give it back." Tyler's grin widened at what he perceived as begging. He made a show of examining the torn photograph before deliberately dropping it and grinding it under his heel. "Oops, butterfingers." Something fundamental shifted in Marcus's expression, a change so subtle that only Sarah, watching from her own locker nearby, caught it. The quiet acceptance was gone, replaced by something colder and infinitely more dangerous. But Marcus still didn't act. Not yet. The harassment reached new heights over the following days. Tyler and his crew, emboldened by Marcus's continued passivity, began staging public humiliations with increasing frequency. They cornered him in hallways, knocked books from his hands in crowded areas, and made loud comments about his appearance and family situation. Other students began to take notice, but not in the way Marcus had hoped. Instead of sympathy or support, he detected a mixture of pity and contempt. He'd become the school's designated victim, a role that seemed to satisfy some unspoken need in the social ecosystem. "Why don't you just fight back?" Sarah asked one afternoon as they sat in the library during lunch period. "I've seen you move. There's something different about the way you carry yourself." Marcus looked up from his chemistry textbook, meeting her concerned gaze. "Because once I start, I might not be able to stop." The honesty in his voice surprised them both. Sarah leaned forward, sensing there was more to Marcus's story than anyone at Westfield High understood. "What does that mean?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. "My father was special forces. He taught me things, skills, that most people never learn. But he also taught me that violence should only be used as a last resort. And we're not there yet." Marcus considered the question carefully. "I keep hoping they'll get bored and move on to someone else." "They won't," Sarah said with certainty. "Guys like Tyler never get bored. They just escalate until someone stops them." Her words proved prophetic. The harassment reached its crescendo the following week during lunch period. Marcus sat at his usual isolated table, eating in silence while the cafeteria buzzed with typical teenage energy. He'd grown accustomed to the pointing and whispered comments, the way conversations quieted when he passed certain groups. Tyler stood up from his table with theatrical ceremony, drawing attention from across the room. He'd been planning something special. Marcus could tell from the way his cronies kept glancing over and snickering. "Hey everyone," Tyler announced loudly, his voice carrying over the lunch crowd. I think our resident freak needs some help with his social skills." A hush fell over the cafeteria as students turned to watch whatever entertainment Tyler had planned. Teachers remained absorbed in their own conversations, either unaware or unwilling to intervene. Tyler approached Marcus's table with exaggerated swagger, followed closely by Jake and Brett. In his hand, he carried something that made Marcus's blood run cold, a knife. Not large, perhaps 4 inches of steel, but unmistakably real and dangerous. "You know what your problem is, psycho," Tyler said, his voice loud enough for the entire cafeteria to hear. "You think you're better than everyone else, walking around all quiet and mysterious like you're some kind of tough guy." Marcus remained perfectly still, his training automatically assessing distances, angles, and potential threats. The knife changed everything. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was assault with a deadly weapon. "I think it's time someone taught you about respect," Tyler continued, the blade glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Maybe a little scar will help you remember your place." Students began backing away from nearby tables, sensing that the situation had crossed a line into genuine danger. Someone should have called for help. Someone should have alerted the teachers. Instead, they watched with the horrified fascination of spectators at a car accident. Tyler raised the knife, not yet threatening directly, but making his intentions clear. "What's wrong, freak? Cat got your tongue." Marcus stood slowly, his movements fluid and controlled. For the first time in months, he looked directly into Tyler's eyes without flinching. "Put the knife down," he said quietly. Tyler laughed, emboldened by what he perceived as desperation. "Or what? You'll tell your mummy." "Last warning," Marcus replied, his voice carrying a quality that made several nearby students take additional steps backward. Tyler lunged forward with the knife, aiming for Marcus's shoulder in what he probably intended as a threatening gesture rather than a killing blow. He expected panic, pleading, or at least an attempt to run. What he got instead was 15 years of combat training, unleashed with surgical precision. Marcus moved like water, flowing around the clumsy attack with an economy of motion that seemed almost choreographed. His left hand captured Tyler's wrist, controlling the weapon while his right delivered an open palm strike to the center of Tyler's chest that sent him stumbling backward. The knife clattered to the floor as Tyler gasped for breath, shocked by the sudden reversal of power. Marcus followed up with a sweep that took Tyler's legs out from under him, sending the would-be attacker crashing to the cafeteria floor. Jake rushed forward to help his friend, only to find himself caught in an arm lock that bent his joints in directions they weren't meant to go. A gentle application of pressure sent him to his knees, crying out in pain and surprise. Brett, seeing his 2 companions neutralized in a matter of seconds, hesitated just long enough for Marcus to close the distance between them. A simple hip toss sent Brett sprawling across an empty table, sending lunch trays and abandoned food flying in all directions. The entire sequence lasted perhaps 10 seconds, but the cafeteria had gone completely silent except for the groans of Tyler's crew. Marcus stood in the center of the chaos, breathing normally, his posture relaxed but ready. Tyler struggled to his feet, his face flushed with humiliation and rage. "You freak! You can't just—" Marcus stepped forward, and Tyler's words died in his throat. There was something in the quiet boy's eyes now, something that promised consequences for any further aggression. "You brought a knife to school," Marcus said calmly, his voice carrying clearly through the silent cafeteria. "You threatened to cut me in front of 50 witnesses, and you destroyed my father's photograph." He picked up the fallen knife, examining it briefly before setting it on a nearby table where teachers would easily find it. "I've been trying to avoid this," Marcus continued, addressing not just Tyler but the entire room. "I came here wanting to fit in, to make friends, to have a normal senior year, but you wouldn't let that happen." Tyler opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus held up a hand for silence. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, "any of you. But this ends now. No more harassment. No more pranks. No more making my life miserable because you think I'm an easy target." The cafeteria remained frozen in stunned silence. Students who had watched months of harassment without intervention now witnessed its dramatic conclusion. Some appeared ashamed of their previous inaction. Others seemed awed by the sudden revelation of Marcus's capabilities. Sarah, who had watched the entire confrontation with wide eyes, stepped forward from her position near the wall. "Marcus," she said softly, "where did you learn to do that?" Marcus glanced at her, then at the crowd of students still frozen in shock. "My father was Special Forces. He taught me that violence should only be used to protect yourself or others, never to prove a point, never for revenge, and never to make yourself feel better about your own problems." He looked back at Tyler, who was still struggling to process what had just happened. But he also taught me that sometimes, when someone threatens you with a weapon, you do what you have to do to survive. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the cafeteria as teachers finally arrived, drawn by reports of a disturbance. Principal Morrison pushed through the crowd of students, taking in the scene of overturned tables, scattered food, and 3 boys looking like they'd been hit by a truck. "What happened here?" he demanded. Multiple voices began speaking at once, students eager to share their version of events. But it was Sarah who stepped forward, her voice clear and confident. "Tyler Hoffman brought a knife to school and threatened Marcus with it," she said. Marcus defended himself. Principal Morrison's expression darkened as he spotted the knife on the table where Marcus had placed it. This wasn't typical teenage drama anymore. This was a serious criminal matter that would involve police reports and possible expulsions. In the hours that followed, statements were taken and security footage reviewed. The evidence was overwhelming and unambiguous. Tyler had initiated the confrontation, brought a weapon to school, and made verbal threats in front of dozens of witnesses. Marcus's response had been measured and defensive, using only the force necessary to neutralize the threat. The story of what happened in the cafeteria spread through Westfield High like wildfire. Security footage confirmed the students' accounts, showing Tyler's unprovoked attack and Marcus's measured response. Tyler faced suspension, criminal charges, and removal from all school activities. Jake and Brett received lesser punishments, but found their social standing significantly diminished. Marcus, meanwhile, discovered that respect could be earned in a single moment of truth. Students who had previously ignored or mocked him now nodded respectfully in the hallways. Teachers took notice of the quiet young man who had handled an impossible situation with remarkable maturity. The change in school dynamics was immediate and profound. Other students who had been targets of bullying found their courage inspired by Marcus's example. Several came forward to report their own experiences with Tyler's group, leading to additional consequences for the former bullies. Sarah became his first real friend at Westfield High, and through her, he began connecting with other students who appreciated his genuine character over his reputation as someone you didn't want to mess with. "You know," she said one afternoon as they walked through the halls together, "I don't think anyone's going to mess with you again." Marcus smiled ruefully. "That was never the point. I just wanted to be left alone to do my work and graduate." "Well, mission accomplished. But now you have something else." "What's that?" "Friends. Real ones. People who respect you for who you are, not because they're afraid of you." Tyler, humbled by his public defeat and facing serious consequences for bringing a weapon to school, eventually approached Marcus with something resembling an apology. It wasn't eloquent or particularly sincere, but it represented an acknowledgement that he had crossed lines that should never have been crossed. "I didn't know," he mumbled during a chance encounter in the hallway. "About your dad, I mean, and the training stuff." Marcus studied him for a moment before responding. "It wouldn't have mattered if you had known. What you did was wrong regardless of whether you thought you could get away with it." Tyler nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Yeah, I know that now." As spring arrived and Marcus's senior year drew to a close, he reflected on the lessons learned during his time at Westfield High. He discovered that avoiding conflict wasn't always possible, but how you handled unavoidable confrontations defined your character. Standing in the same cafeteria, where everything had changed, Marcus smiled as Sarah approached with her lunch tray. The tables around them buzzed with normal teenage conversation, but the atmosphere was different now, more respectful, more aware. "So," Sarah said, settling into the seat across from him, "college applications are due soon. Where are you thinking of going?" Marcus considered the question. His grades were excellent, his disciplinary record clean despite the knife incident, and several universities had already expressed interest in his unique combination of academic achievement and demonstrated leadership under pressure. "Somewhere I can study to become a teacher," he replied. "I think I'd like to work with kids who need someone to believe in them." Sarah smiled. "Your dad would be proud." Marcus touched the repaired photograph in his wallet, now carefully laminated to prevent further damage. His father's image looked back at him with the same quiet strength that had carried Marcus through his darkest moments at Westfield High. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think he would be." The final bell rang, signaling the end of another school day. As students filed out of the cafeteria toward their lockers and afternoon activities, Marcus gathered his things with the same methodical care he'd always shown. But now, instead of hurrying to avoid unwanted attention, he walked with the confidence of someone who had faced his fears and emerged stronger. He'd learned that being different wasn't a weakness to hide, but a strength to embrace. That standing up for yourself didn't require becoming someone you weren't proud of, and that sometimes the quiet kid in the corner had more courage than anyone else in the room. Most importantly, he discovered that real strength wasn't about proving you could hurt someone. It was about knowing you could, but choosing not to unless absolutely necessary. His father's lessons had finally made complete sense, tested in the crucible of real-world conflict and emerging more valuable than ever. Marcus Delano walked out of Westfield High that day, as he had every day, for months, but everything was different now. He was different, not because he'd won a fight, but because he'd stood up for what was right while refusing to let anger turn him into something he would regret. That was the real victory. That was the lesson worth learning, and that was the story he would carry with him long after high school became just a memory. The transformation from victim to survivor to protector was complete, and Marcus knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same quiet strength that had served him so well at Westfield High.